really soon. I'd like to welcome Hussein Mehanna. I'm going to give a little bit of background that I know about him, and then I'm going to jump into some questions, and hopefully we'll all learn a little bit more about his upbringing and all the technologies that he's been working on in recent years. So Hussein, it's really awesome to have you here. I've been looking forward to this session for quite some time now. Very excited to dive in. For those of you who don't know me, I'm one of the board members here at Techwadi. I've also been a venture capital investor for the last 5 years. And before that, I spent about 7 years at Google, mostly on the ad side of the business. And before that, I was an entrepreneur, just like many of you, going back to the early or mid 90s, all the way through to 2010 timeframe. And you know, I lived in Southern California, which was not a tech hub back then. And then later on moved to the Bay Area, maybe out of stubbornness. I thought we could build tech hubs everywhere, and it did come. Just timing was a bit off. Just to give you a little background, or professional background at least, on Hussein. Hussein is the head of artificial intelligence at Cruz. He's an expert in AI with a passion for machine learning, and he has over 15 years of experience and has successfully built and led AI teams at multiple Fortune 500 companies. Prior to Cruz, Hussein led the cloud AI platform organization at Google. Under his leadership there, his team revamped the product line and rebuilt the organization. The cloud AI platform became cloud AI's fastest growing product segment. And before Google, Hussein worked at Facebook, where he co-founded the Applied Machine Learning Group that combined applied research in machine learning and advanced platforms. He helped democratize artificial intelligence with more than 2,000 engineers using the technologies, and his team added billions of dollars of revenue to the company. He's also been through Snap, Microsoft, and Procter & Gamble. Hussein has his master's in computer science, text, and internet technology from the University of Cambridge, and a bachelor's of science in computer science from Ain Shams University. So welcome, Hussein. Great to have you with us.
Thank you, Sherif. Great to be here.
Hussein, I'd like to start with just a brief window into your upbringing. Tell us about Hussein Mehanna, the person, and how you got to where you are today.
I was born in Kuwait in the 80s, and then after the Iraqi invasion, I moved to Egypt, where we're from, and there I finished my undergrad in computer science. My father was very much involved with technology. He liked to program, and so that's where I got my first beginnings. Then I started my journey in machine learning through my studies at Cambridge. And since then, I've been hooked, and I've worked in multiple tech companies. And it's been a great journey so far. Really happy about it, and really grateful to the great teachers, lecturers, leaders that I interacted with in Egypt and afterwards.
And did you do your master's straight out of college? So you were a coder for a while before, or did you learn coding younger and then just jumped into machine learning in your master's?
Great question. No, I learned coding at school before doing my undergrad, and then obviously in my undergrad it was computer science focused. As soon as I finished my undergrad, 2-3 months, I started my master's, where I got much more exposure to machine learning. But all through that period, I would go through internships or coding projects on and off. So, but my first real sort of programmer job was at Microsoft in 2006.
Is that when you moved to the US? I guess
right.
After your master's and before Microsoft?
Yes, that's right.
Great. So I think that's a very relatable story for many of the audience members here. I came from a diaspora sort of birth where my parents had immigrated in the 60s and then born in California. Now, last few years living in the Middle East. So funny how things are going in circles.
Yeah.
I'd love to jump into some of the subject matter areas that you focus on, because they're fascinating for all of us and for the implications that they have on our lives. what are, but you know, they're not short of you know, haters or issues or risks, especially when it comes to AI and autonomous vehicles. Can you tell us, like, what are some of the unique challenges facing the autonomous vehicle industry?
Yeah, let me just quickly start by like talking about some of the opportunities. I think autonomous vehicles, when we talk to people, they tell us that they have two major pain points. One, they need more mobility, and the second one is they need more freedom. And so in terms of mobility, people have to look after their cars, they have to charge them or fill them up or maintain them. But imagine a world where you just step out of your house and there's a vehicle ready to pick you up and take you anywhere, without you having to worry about driving it, and in the most safe manner. And you get to your destination free of traffic jams, free of you know, the guilt because of emissions. And so essentially it's an amazing experience. I actually do believe that autonomous vehicles are gonna change the way we live, just like when humanity moved from horses to vehicles that were available to the regular Joe in the beginning of the 20th century. It actually changed cities here in the United States. That's how suburbia evolved, and a lot of what we live in today is because of that. So I think autonomous vehicles are gonna have a transformational impact on our life. And I think also, just to add one more point here, if you look at the last 300 years of humanity's progress, machinery played a huge role. 300 years ago, we would have been busy growing potatoes and food just to get by through the winter. But now through machinery and technology, the human experience has been elevated, and we're focusing, and we have time to focus on higher level things. So I think autonomous vehicles is another step in that journey.
Before we go into the challenges question, one of the viewers reminded me to sort of back up a second and tell them what you do at Cruz, and what does Cruz do?
Yes, absolutely. So Cruz is an autonomous vehicle company. It started around 2013, and then along its journey, it was acquired by General Motors. But then in 2018, it received more funding from other venture capitalists and Honda and others. So now it's its own separate company. We still have a very strong relationship with General Motors. Our goal is, our first application for autonomous vehicles is ride hailing. So we are building our own car from scratch, designed for autonomy. We call it the Cruz Origin, and we're going to deploy it in San Francisco as our first city, and then expand from there. But you know, these are the first applications. We also have a partnership with Walmart regarding delivery in Phoenix. So that's another area that we are exploring. Now, regarding what I do,
that's a good stage setter.
Yes, what I do at Cruz is I lead the artificial intelligence teams. So we build the brain that drives the car, essentially perceives the environment around it, and also tries to predict what other vehicles and pedestrians are going to do, in addition to other teams that support it, like the machine learning infrastructure and data science groups.
Great. I'm sure that's helpful. Thank you. So let's jump into some of the challenges. Why did I even bring up that question? What are some of the challenges over the last 10 years we've seen, and the news tries to make a scene of it, but these are hard problems that you're solving, right? And you need a real world environment to test it in.
Yes.
What are the challenges these days look like, if I haven't been involved in the last couple of years?
So safety is an extremely important feature of our product, and that's it is a challenge, but it's also really delightful to see that it is a core objective of this product. In fact, our objective is to build a superhuman vehicle. Our sensors don't blink, they don't get distracted by text messages, and so on. And so from the get-go, we are aiming for very high levels of safety. And I think this helps our development process overcome some of the problems that you folks might have heard in the news around AI fairness. In some of these contexts, these problems evolve because they're not necessarily dealing with a high bar for safety or a high bar for their objective. On the other hand, we have this very high bar, so we have to elevate our testing capabilities, our simulation capabilities. We need to understand the input distribution or the environment that the car operates in. We invest significant amount of resources to measure and understand human performance and how we can compare against it. So this is, out of my experiences in many other companies that use machine learning, this is by far the most comprehensive experience in terms of understanding how your artificial intelligence system is going to operate. And by definition, we have to do that because we cannot release a car. No company will be able to release a car until they understand how safe it operates in the real world environment.
And is the community of AV engineers working together or competing? Is there meant to be a sharing in standards? Or?
I mean, I think there's both. We obviously are working together because there's the common legislator, at least in the United States and in California and so on. So there's definitely some common work here, but obviously we have there's competition in the industry. That said, I really see them as peers and colleagues, and we're all working together towards this amazing journey of delivering an autonomous vehicle to customers. We might take different paths, and that in itself is beneficial for innovation. So I would say friendly competition, let's say.
All right, great. If we were to move on a little bit, you're doing something at Cruz, I think that's never been done before, right? Some defining the AV playbook. Can you tell us more about that?
Yes, absolutely. So we touched, there are 2 points here, and we touched on one of them. The first one is safety. This is quite different than what I've seen in other tech products. The second one is building an AI native company. So in terms of safety, we've already discussed that we have to elevate our testing procedures. We have to, from the get-go, design for a superhuman performance, something that never blinks, never gets distracted. The second thing is building an AI native company, and I want to explain this in a few seconds. Or take a couple of seconds to explain it. So I've worked in many.
Well, take your time. That's my next question.
So there are many companies that I've worked in where machine learning is important for the product, but it's an optimizer. So let me give you an example. Amazon Marketplace existed even before machine learning was used there. However, machine learning definitely helps Amazon Marketplace. Same thing with Facebook Newsfeed, Google Search, and so on. So these products existed before machine learning was really a core component. So I call these products as optimized or refined or empowered by AI. However, an AI native product is a product that cannot exist, even in its minimal viable form, without artificial intelligence. Autonomous vehicles is one example, and also conversational agents like Alexa is another. And so when you build such a product and you build a company around it, I do believe there are aspects that are different from other companies. So let me give you an example. The learning cycle needs to be extremely fast. In traditional enterprise companies, you'll have a marketing function. It discovers requirements from customers. In a couple of quarters, they filter it to engineers, and then in a couple of quarters or a year, the engineers will build a product, they put it back on the market, and then you go through this very long enterprise loop. In our business, in AI native companies, this learning cycle needs to be, I'm not going to say days, needs to be in hours. And in fact, we're automating it. We have our cars driving on the road, and as they're driving, we are pushing forward so that we can get to a point that every insight we can collect from the road gets transcribed into a neural network, into a gradient that improves a neural network. And we're trying to do that in as short time as possible so that we learn and then we put that neural network back on the road where it again gets tested and further tested and further exposed to other conditions. And the faster we go through that loop, the faster we're going to have a product. The same applies to Alexa. So I do believe AI native companies are going to have to go through this learning cycle as fast as possible. And the only way to do it is actually to automate such cycle. And that's what I think Cruz is building in the background is a fully or semi-automated learning cycle from the road to the code or to the network and back again.
That's super fascinating. I'm so glad you touched on this AI native versus AI as an enhancer, because every other deck we receive as investors has the word AI in it, and we always have to make that clarification, because in day one of any startup, AI really has no purpose, especially if it's as an enhancer, because we don't have any data yet. But to know AI native companies and how important it is to get it right and to have a constant feedback loop with the complexity of inputs that you're getting, it reminds me a little bit about what's coming with 5G and how many millions more devices will be connected, and that you're going to have to use AI to administer and manage it, because humans cannot just go out to the towers all the time and fix things. So it's really interesting that we're moving towards that. I heard a rumor that you actually operate your team or your organization like a neural network. Can you tell us a little bit about that? Is it true, first of all? And what does that even mean?
It's an analogy. So think about, the way you train a neural network is that it has outputs, and then you compare it to the expected outcomes, and you back propagate the learning through the neural network so that the neural network adjusts and gets closer to the right answer. That's exactly not just my organization, but the entire AI native company, in my opinion, needs to operate. So you build a product, you're using it in the real world, whether it's still ready for production or not, it needs to learn from these scenarios, or even from simulation. You can simulate the real world through some good simulators. And then there are going to be learnings. So you need to identify these learnings as fast as possible. You can put human beings who could sit down and manually transcribe everything, but that doesn't scale. You have to automate or semi-automatically transcribe these learnings. And then these learnings need to go and adjust every layer in the organization. So at Cruz, our technicians who drive the cars need to adjust. And then the learnings that they provide go to, let's say, product managers who understand the car's behavior. They need to adjust. And then finally, it comes to the engineer, and then it makes all its way to the network. What we have found is this process of back propagation, the more automated it is, like actually some of these layers are a combination of human beings and tools. And the more we supplement these human beings with tools, the faster we can extract these insights, the faster our neural networks get updated, the faster this AI brain sort of learns and adapts. I mean, in a year, Cruz drives more miles than any human being would drive in a lifetime. If this cycle was instantaneous, we would have the best human driver ever. But because this technology is not there yet, but we're approaching that, and we're getting very close to it, the faster we turn around the cycle, the faster this robot will learn. And then think about this process and apply it to any other robot. I think that will be the beginnings of actual robotics, not just on the street, but at homes and factories and so on.
It's so interesting. I mean, could we not apply this framework of management to non-native AI companies or to our children?
I think you can. I think you can. And I think the future will, it's just a paradigm shift. Just like prior to the web, you had companies operate in a particular model, and then the web came, and that model sort of, people started migrating to it, and now you have mobile, and that's a different model. You have mobile and the cloud. I think the robotics or the AI native model is going to be an evolution. It's going to be a paradigm shift. You're absolutely right. Others can operate like that. It's still developing, it's still evolving, but I would say 5 years from now, I wouldn't be surprised that many companies are pointing to that model and saying, this is where we need to go.
So OKRs are out the window, you're saying?
I don't think so. Actually, if you think about machine learning, you have to have an objective that you're optimizing towards. That's actually, it's called the objective function. So you will have OKRs. It's just how do you optimize that by leveraging automation as much as possible and accelerating learning. Sort of how do you automatically, as our car drives, we collect data and we try to automatically detect sort of mistakes, even if these mistakes, I mean, the car can still drive safely and there could be small mistakes that it's making. Like it may not have seen the right footprint of a large vehicle next to it, even though that vehicle is far away. That mistake, you can learn from it and prevent another mistake in the future. So how do you detect these mistakes automatically is extremely useful. And if you can do that, I think you can automate the extraction of insights and filter through them. And that would be beneficial to any enterprise, not just an AV industry.
And can we talk a little bit about what kind of issues or challenges the industry is facing from folks outside the industry, whether it's the AI component itself or the autonomous vehicle side of things? I think each has its own subset of complaints.
So actually,
what are people afraid of?
Yeah, I think, well, there are a couple of things. I think there's bias and fairness, but there's also another actually very interesting trend that I'm getting more and more exposed to, and I get more questions. And that is, what is the right leadership to drive the AI journey within an enterprise? And so you have a company, they want to harness the power of AI, and more often than not, you see them importing leaders from academia or leaders from other tech companies that have nothing in common with their business. And I think that now that this has been happening for a couple of years, people are starting to see that it may not be bringing the ROI that they want. Just recently, I've been discussing with a couple of leaders from one of the biggest banks in the United States, and they had sort of imported 2 leaders, and they were asking me about advice to import the 3rd. At which point I stopped them and said, but wait a minute, you're one of the biggest banks in the United States. You guys have significant amount of quantitative and mathematical capabilities, which is the core of machine learning. You must have someone inside of your organization that you can grow to drive that change. That is a person who understands the culture. That's the person who understands the business. And then, through education, or if you give them time and scope and space, they will learn the AI part. And so I could see them, thinking about it and realizing that perhaps looking inwards is a great opportunity to drive change towards AI. And I think a lot of companies are realizing AI is a tool. It's not a destination. But previously, people thought of AI as a destination, as something, if you have it, it will generate value. That's not true. Just as you said, you need to have a product. You need to have a problem that customers really want, and then AI can come and enhance it and optimize it. And there are very few companies where AI is the core, but so be it. And if that's the case, then fantastic. But it's very important to realize that the culture of the company and the business knowledge are not, should not be easily replaceable when you're driving this AI journey.
Yeah, you need the context, right? So if we're talking about different kinds of AI, what's the difference between the AI used in Alexa or a company we know well on the East Coast, Effectiva, and the AI that you do at Cruz?
Well, it's actually, the application is different. And so it's the domain, right? And I think the domain, so the core of the AI at the end of the day, if they're using neural networks, the science is almost the same, right? It's almost like saying, what's the difference between programming in these companies? If they're all using C++ or Java or some other language, probably the foundations of technology are the same. But then what matters is, how do you apply this technology to the relevant domain? I think there's probably a set of commonalities. I think we can generalize the need to accelerate learnings and insight extraction, but how you do that becomes extremely dominated by the domain itself. So we've developed our tricks and our capabilities in understanding road performance, but I suspect when you're dealing with human emotions or you're dealing with speech, the tricks become very different. And so that is that, and that's where I suspect is the value, is developing that domain experience.
Great. And let me take a few questions from the audience, and also I have a few fun questions I wanted to just pepper in as well, if we have time. One thing we didn't talk about too much is are Cruz's cars going to be for personal use, or like the Uber, the automated Uber?
At the moment, the Cruz Origin, it's for ride hailing. So it's a robo-taxi, and they're designed like that. But, the good news is that once you build such a platform, basically based on customer needs and where we see value, you can obviously evolve into other paths. I do believe that building a robotaxi is the hardest of the problems, and so the others become
right. Right, that's right. So eventually, though, I mean, if every car is autonomous, then why should we own cars? We just, once you step at the curb, a car comes and gets you. You know, you don't have to. It doesn't have to be your car, right?
I totally agree, and I think that will be the case, the majority of the case for 99.9% of the population. But you never know. Someone might want their own self-driving Rolls Royce, I guess, and you know, why not?
Yeah, yeah. One of the other questions was very similar to a question I had written down, and I wanted to ask you: will emerging markets, you know, or developing countries be able to leapfrog vehicle and transportation innovation? Like cities like Cairo, cities like Bangkok, small villages, dirt roads, are they going to get to take advantage of autonomous vehicles as soon as, you know, the developed cities?
It's a great question. I don't think it would be in the same period. There are two probably factors there. One, which is it requires more advanced technology to operate in less structured cities, and so it would require us more time. The second thing is sort of the technology needs to mature to a point where it becomes cost effective in places where maybe labor costs are less than well-established cities. So I think there's the technological aspect and there's the economical aspect, but I do believe that sooner or later we will have a level 5 autonomous vehicle that you can drop it anywhere and it will figure its way through. And I think this will be beneficial to all types of cities in the world.
I can't wait for that to happen. That'll be great. Another question is from an AI expert himself, who's also working, I think, in the autonomous vehicle space. He's saying, how do you measure safety of the AI system? And more importantly, how do you benchmark it against other systems that don't use the same software or hardware?
Well,
it's from Mohammed Musa.
That's a great question. We are in discussions always with regulators. There is data, and especially through our relationship with General Motors, and that's the great advantage. You can measure safety of cars. I mean, you have vehicles with OnStar systems that automatically notify headquarters or call for help if they get into a crash. So we do have data sources that allows us to measure the performance of human beings in various cities. And I think such data would become more and more publicly available as AV companies advance in their journey with regulators. And then you can measure your performance essentially based on a test trial. You could, drive a specific amount of miles and see, with a human being behind the wheel to take over in case to prevent from a serious accident. And then you can measure safety based on that. In fact, we do this day in, day out. So just right now, as I'm speaking, our vehicles are driving in the road. There are safety drivers who would take over. These takeovers, some of them get automatically sent over the wire to our systems and then ingested by engineers and tools and automated systems that try and analyze and understand if there was no driver behind the wheel, would have this been, what kind of safety incident could have this been? And then from there, we extract incidents. So we actually measure our safety day in, day out.
You guys recently, you got approved, I think, a few years ago for testing, but you actually started testing last December 2020, right?
That's right.
Is there any interesting insights you can share with us about that experience so far? I think you guys mentioned that SF is one of the most complex places to learn.
Yes.
What are some of the funny things you learned about San Francisco so far?
San Francisco drivers will never stop to surprise you with all their antiques and various interesting ways of driving. And I think this is actually a machine learning system's Pandora box, because drivers in San Francisco are quite creative when it comes to their adherence to driving laws. And even in the pandemic, when you have far less traffic, we're actually seeing very clear evidence that people are driving, unfortunately, more recklessly. And there's evidence also of data that the fatalities per drivers have, the number of fatalities overall have reduced during the pandemic, but the number of fatalities per drivers is actually increasing. So, yes, because the streets are more open, so people are driving at higher speeds and a bit more reckless than if you're in a, you know, stop and go traffic jam. So, you know, we see it, we're learning a lot from San Francisco, and it's challenging our systems. Anyone building a machine learning system knows that the biggest danger is overfitting. And thanks to San Francisco, I think it's really hard to overfit because of the variety.
Can you explain overfitting for the audience?
Yes. So when you build a machine learning system, you train it on a small data set. Overfitting is where the model operates really well on the small data set, but fails to operate well outside because it hasn't extracted insights that are generalized. Let me give you a very interesting degenerate example. There was a researcher who was training models to identify horses. And so the model performed really well on the photos that she collected. And then when she took it to the real world, the model performed badly. And it turned out that the photos she collected had a sort of, were coming from specific photographers who had their trademark or their sort of logo. And so the model, instead of learning how to identify a horse, learned how to identify the logo. And then when you took it out in the real world, there was no logo. And so that is a very silly, degenerate case of overfitting. And so there are times where the model may learn specifics about the training set that don't generalize in the real world. But you overcome overfitting by having a diversified data set. By the way, this is one of the reasons why you have problems and bias with ML. If your data set only contains photos of white people, then it will struggle on photos of colored people. But thanks to San Francisco, we have such a diverse set of neighborhoods, diverse topologies, very narrow and wide streets, and a diverse set of drivers, frankly, who really help us collect a significant amount of data. And this is completely different if you compare it to like much more suburban areas like Phoenix. I mean, we estimate that San Francisco is 50 times harder to drive in than Phoenix. And that means, yes, it might make our system, it might make it hard for our systems, but we have a lot more data and a lot high quality data that helps us generalize our system from the get-go.
And theoretically, if you're generalized enough, you should be able to go into more simpler environments easier.
Of course, yes, that's exactly. If you train it on a harder test set, then you expect to do better when you go to simpler environments. Yes.
I'm telling you, Cairo's calling. We can talk to the ministers.
Cairo is another 50x from San Francisco, or 100.
Right.
We'll take our time. It's definitely in our roadmap, but a little bit further ahead.
Well, you mentioned Phoenix. I wanted to just touch on the pilot you guys are working on for grocery deliveries, I believe, right, with Walmart. One of the questions here from Owen was about food transportation. Do you think that's going to come first, or will moving passengers around go first? The two problems are interesting. I really don't know. I don't want to make a bet necessarily on which one comes first. When you're traveling passengers, it's actually important that the comfort of the ride is important. So you can still be safe, but you don't want the passengers to come out feeling dizzy. When you're transporting food, you don't have to worry as much about how your food feels because it's not going to get nauseous. However, when you're transporting food, the time to delivery becomes very important because some foods may go bad and so on. And so you have some different aspects there. So I think there are pluses and minuses to each problem. That said, I want to say that economically, transporting people is extremely lucrative. And this is one of the reasons why we've started with that. And it's important for an emerging technology like this because you want to address the highest margin opportunities first as the technology matures and the prices go down. Right. I had a question about other forms of autonomous transportation for you. Like, um, do you see air modes of autonomous transportation coming anytime soon, either at the individual level or the commercial level?
Yeah, no, absolutely. I do envision that we're going to have, we're going to approach a point where even public transportation is autonomized. So it is a matter of where do you start your MVP? And I think Cruz has done a fantastic study and decided to focus in San Francisco because it's not because it's harder. It's actually because of business reasons. Like this is where rides are really short and the overhead of human drivers is higher. And so we've decided to focus on that. But trucking and other opportunities are awesome, but they come in at a, smaller business opportunity than ride hailing, especially for trucking, because the overhead of a trucker is far smaller given the amount of goods that they're transporting. So all of these are coming. I mean, I don't see, think of what Cruz is doing today is just the beginning. It's the beachhead. But from there, we can move into other areas. That said, we're a very focused company, and whenever we move, whenever we consider a new opportunity, we want to make sure we're not distracting ourselves, because if we tackle too many things in parallel, we may not achieve as much as we want.
And what level of vehicle autonomy are we at now, would you say?
So, what we're targeting at the moment is level 4, which means that we do have a high definition map. Level 5 is where you don't even have a high definition map. So that's the level of autonomy we're targeting. It helps us improve our safety. It helps us, again, develop our MVP as fast as possible. But, level 5 is only a natural evolution from there.
Level 5 would be dirt roads and
not necessarily dirt roads, but it doesn't mean that you have a high definition map. Like you still understand the roads, like you have to understand the roads eventually to get from one point to the other. But a high definition map tells you more about the road, like where's the position of the curb, what are the lanes, all of that. And by the way, building such maps is not hard. It's very much doable, and we have some fantastic tools to do that. So I think. Slowly we're going to move from one city to the other through high definition maps, but eventually we evolve into a point where we don't need such maps.
I'm imagining a situation where you take an autonomous vehicle from London, or they're driving on the other side of the road, and you bring it to the US and it gets confused, or it thinks yellow lines are okay to cross and the other state might say white lines are okay to cross. Like that's some serious generalization that you're going to have to do after learning in one place, right?
That's right. I mean, though I would say how many people need to travel from London to New York in a car, I highly doubt there's a lot. So it might not be a use case we focus on, but yes, as we move from one city to the other, we need to make sure that we are following the codes in these cities, which are quite different.
So just making sure the computer knows that, hey, this is the context I'm in, these are the rules here.
There will be an adaptation phase. And there's something called transfer learning, where you don't have to start from scratch. You've learned all of this from one place, you can apply it to another. And so you speed up your learning process.
Oh, cool. So I have a controversial question for you, at least controversial, I think, in the autonomous vehicle space. LiDAR or no LiDAR?
No, it's not controversial at all. I think Cruz has made a bet.
At least one person thinks it's very controversial, right?
I think, no, but let's be, every company has its own business model. Like companies that have chosen not to do LiDAR because they already have a car on the road, that is the most rational process for them. But for us, for Cruz, we have a completely different business model. We can build our car from scratch. We can ramp up its development, and we can, get the cost of LiDAR lower, either through ramping up production and through innovation. And so, but at the same time, it just improves safety significantly. I mean, with LiDAR, you pretty much see and know that there's something in front of the car by default. It's a process of saying, okay, well, that's a small pile of dirt here, you can go over it, but at least, if you want to be conservative, you can afford to do that. So safety, you get a huge bump in safety because of that. But if you remove LiDAR and you don't have depth, the problem becomes several orders of magnitude harder. And I think it will, slow down your progress. But again, every company has a different business model. And I think we're very happy with ours. And it seems that the majority of autonomous vehicle companies that are targeting either ride hailing or delivery or trucking are mostly using LiDAR as well. So, and I think the price of LiDAR, whether LiDAR itself or other similar technologies, is just going to go down with time.
I mean, that's kind of what I thought looking at that discussion happening. I said, why wouldn't you use an extra sensor if you can? And it's not going to dramatically change the cost of everything down the road. So I think it sounds to me more of a posturing comment. Just sort of
maybe the comment posturing, but I understand if you already have a vehicle company and you're selling vehicles to customers right now, there's no way you can sort of, like, the price of the vehicle will go much higher. And you still don't have it's not really fully autonomous, even if they call it that. So I just don't see how you can sell such a car, but you can definitely build such a car and use it for ride hailing, as we are planning to do. That the economics make sense. So I don't know. I mean, I respect other people's opinions, and I look at it with curiosity. And if there's something we can learn from them, we can, and happy for them to learn from us as well.
All right. I think we're coming up close to time. I'm happy to see if there's any other questions from the audience. I had one last question. This may be controversial, or at least PR might tell you don't say anything, but I'll ask anyway. Who are some of the top AV companies to watch for these days? Who's pulling out ahead of the pack, besides Cruz, of course?
All right. I don't want to differentiate between my peers. I don't want to make some of them happy, some of them not. But I think who's
doing cool stuff.
The major players are well known, and I genuinely believe that we all have a common mission. And it's just like, for those people who are old enough to remember the early days of the web, there were a lot of skepticism, right? There was Yahoo, there was Google.
Yeah, definitely.
But I believe that the winners in this area are going to grow big and have a lot of success. They can hire everybody else in the industry. I mean, think of Google. It can hire 3 Yahoos altogether if it wants to, and it has. So I'm not super worried about the zero-sum game, and that's what I really tell my peers. We're all gonna, I think we're all driving an amazing mission, and we're all gonna benefit from that one way or another. So I think there is a non-zero-sum game here.
Definitely. And I mean, you said it in the beginning, the value coming out of all these achievements and where we'll end up being one day is tremendous. I mean, virtually no accidents, insurance premiums going way down, mechanic shops, less needed. There's so many benefits, and you can keep playing out the reverb of that benefit because it'll affect roads, it'll affect people's work styles, it'll affect so many things. It's super exciting. I'm so glad we have somebody like you from the community leading in it. There is one final question I'll go ahead and ask because it pertains to Cruz. And then I'd like to thank everybody for attending. The last question is, what is the business model of Cruz going to be?
Well, at the moment, we are targeting ride hailing, and we have this partnership with Walmart for delivery. We are building our own vehicle from the ground up, fully optimized for ride hailing. So that's what we're targeting. And we're targeting San Francisco as the first city to deploy.
Will the ride hailing be just like it is now, pay per ride, or will it have a subscription?
Oh,
still early to tell.
It's maybe too early to tell, but I'm pretty sure these are all things that we can experiment with. I think as the technology gets readier and readier, more of these details will become obvious. Today, we have a lot of our employees using our cars, or obviously before COVID-19. And we've learned a lot from these patterns, and we're looking forward to applying this and bringing it to the general audience.
Amazing. And you will be selling your cars potentially as well to consumers?
So far, again, our cars are optimized for ride hailing. They're optimized to drive in our fleet, but I don't know what the future holds.
Hussein, this has been an absolute pleasure. I've learned so much myself. I'm sure the audience has enjoyed it as well. Thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you very much. Bye-bye.
Thank you, Sherif. Thank you, Hussein. That was a panel to end the day with. Thank you for the audience. This was day 1. See you tomorrow at day 2, which will be hosting a few interesting chats, including Ronaldo, founder of Soup and VP of Amazon MENA, chats with some YC Combinator startups, chats about the Palestinian entrepreneurship ecosystem, and many more founders and entrepreneurs. So see you tomorrow, and thank you for joining us at day 1. You can the event will be open, so you can actually move to the networking tab on the left and network on a one-to-one basis with both attendees and speakers. Have a great rest of your day. If you're in the MENA, have a good night. And if you're on the West Coast, enjoy the afternoon. Thank you very much. See you all in day 2 tomorrow.